Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky.
And we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week we have Dave Dame returning on the podcast. Dave was one of our early guests, and Dave's a PST like Jeff and myself. He's also a TEDx speaker. He's a leader of leaders, and he's just been doing Agile before Agile was even a thing. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that, and he definitely shares a story about that in his TEDx talk. But Dave, I don't know. One of the things that we talked about last time when you were on a lot was like the pandemic was just starting. Like it was early on and we didn't even know what this thing was. I think it was like February and it was like right in the very beginning. And we talked a lot about hope and faith in people and taking care of people inside of our teams. But it's been a while now. What's changed for you? What's the last couple of years look like for you?
But you know what the most amazing thing is, funny you bring us back to that space, because now I really remember that we had so much unknown and complexity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to be a 2-week thing? Is this going to be a month thing? Is it going to be a quarterly thing? How are we going to work? How are we going to respond? And there was so much change needing to happen, from working in the office to working distributed, finding new ways of shopping, finding new ways to interact with our friends. But look at where we are today. 2 years later, we figured out how to do the remote work thing. We figured out the right balance between what are the activities best to do in person, what are the best to do remotely. The biggest thing that holds us back from change is our fear and trust in ourselves that we'll be able to come out the other side positively on change. And as humans, it happens to me, it happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
But what the pandemic should have taught us is, if we can do this dramatic amount of change and transformation, what else can we do now that we've proven to ourselves that we can adapt and change and find new ways to work? So I think any organizations that struggled with change before should use this recent memory of, if this thing was possible, what else could be possible?
Mm-hmm. What do you think are some of those core things that made this possible? Like
I think the core things were trust, right? Traditional leaders had to trust, if I'm not standing over anybody, the work is still going to get done. They had to trust that working from home didn't mean we're watching Netflix, right? And catching up on our binges. But I think what we had to learn was how painful meetings were, because now our calendars were finite and we had to balance social meetings and day-to-day work. So I think it really made it clear of when we needed to collaborate and when we needed head down work. And I think we realized that work life doesn't need to be in 8-hour time chunks. We can break it down to 1 or 2 hours where we do a little bit of work and then we do something personal and go back to work. Like if you would have asked me 2 years ago, could I do my job fully remote? I'd be like, no way. I got to be in the office. I'm going to influence and change. I got to be physically there. To now, my new job is I onboarded remotely a new job, and I'm fine with being a remote worker because I changed my time from my commute time to now dedicating it to work out. So during the pandemic, I've dropped 54 pounds.
Yeah, you look great, man.
I've never been in any better shape than I've been in, because now everything we had to do to get to work before we even start our day is now reclaimed time that we can invest in ourselves, whether it's physically, whether it's growth learning, or whether it's peace of mind and clarity, right? So it's really made us, gave us greater autonomy over our environment.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick here because I was thinking a lot about this the other day, ironically, and like my work schedule personally has changed quite a bit. You were just talking about that, work-life balance, and I'm fortunate enough where I have a home gym that I've been building up. And so I get up in the morning, I do my workout, and then I started doing mindfulness. And so I do my meditation in the morning. I go and do my work, and I'll typically work for about 6 hours, and then I'll take a break. I'll go take a break, have dinner with the family, relax, watch some YouTube movies, and then I'll pop back on for like an hour or two in the evening or whatever it happens to be. But and it's so nice to just have that flexibility now in my schedule that was never available to me in the past, where I did have that mentality of like, it's got to fit within these time boxes because I got to get up and go to work at this time, to be there by this time, to leave by this time, to be home by this time, etc. And now there's just a whole lot more fluid. And all of a sudden I found that like it's more fulfilling when I have a little bit more control over the situation to be able to say, I just need a break right now. I'm just going to turn around and go play some video games for a little bit, and that's fine. Versus the very regimented structure that was necessary before.
Well, exactly. It really lets you, like, there's days where, like, we're not our best energy, right? So before, we used to be stuck in the constraints of the office at our lowest productivity rate, but it's better to be there and not be there at all. Where if days we're not feeling it, we'll do what needs to be done, but why push through it when maybe today's not the day where I'm changing the world with great ideas and running teams and delivering. Maybe I got to take a break for a few hours and then I'll get my energy afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to worry about I got to get in the car, get dinner prepared, or do anything. Now you have a greater flexibility, which clears your mind. Your employer gets your best energy, but you also get your best energy to do things like throw a load of laundry in between meetings. So now what was restricted to do on the weekends, now you're freeing your weekends up because you're doing those things that were just required to do and wait in parallel with your normal day of work, giving yourself more downtime to be more present when you're at work.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about those key things. I think one of the key things is empathy for each other, that we've kind of found like, oh yeah, like I trust that you're going to do the best you can and figure out ways of working and you're going to contribute, but right now is not the time. So you're going to find another time to contribute in the next couple days, or you're going to do this, here or there. And just assuming the best out of each other. I think a lot more that's come through the pandemic. And I don't know, here's just another story recently. So I had to do this workshop for this client, and it was going to be like a half day workshop. And I was like, some of these invitations aren't quite right for some of the liberating structures that we're going to be using. And I'm outside playing football with my 8-year-old. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's the way I want to word that. And I pulled my phone, write it down, and throw a few more passes. Then, I need to change this. And like, it comes to you, right, as you're doing stuff. So it's like I'm playing football with my son, and I'm also working at the same time. And it's kind of a great thing that would never happen in the way we used to work before.
Well, it always happened, but it was way too late, right? Because you were forced at home as you're about to go to bed. That's when I have my best ideas where I'm like, I wish I would have said this in the workshop, or I wish I would have framed it like this. Hindsight is great if it could only happen sooner. And it's really breaking our days into those smaller chunks has allowed us to distribute that reflection time throughout the day, not in the shower in the morning or at bed when we're going to sleep, right? We're allowing ourselves to have that time. Because I'm the same with you. Like, all us trainers, we'll go home that night and go, oh, I wish I would have framed it like that. And we write notes down so the next day we can make sure, hey, remember we're talking about this? Now we get to do it more closer in the moment. And better yet, the students get to as well. I've been finding greater questions coming out of breaking the workshop into 3 or 4 days and giving them breaks than when we used to do it in 2 full days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and long breaks too. I've been doing a lot more of that where, people take 10, 15-minute breaks, every hour maybe even. And it's just like you come back and they feel refreshed and they put that little laundry in and now they can really focus, and it seems to really help.
Quick break. We know you can't support all shows, but when you do support a show, think of the Agile Wire when you subscribe and share.
So, Dave, you just kind of switching topics here a little bit. So you made a transition in your career. You now work at Microsoft. How has that transition been during a pandemic?
That transition was really interesting because I wasn't really looking at moving roles or careers, right? I was working at my previous employer where we're finding a new way of working. What is this new hybrid work going to look like? So it does involve Agile, but not only Agile. It was going wider and wider. I was getting other offers, but I'm like, do I want to move? And then this one from Microsoft came, and it was like for the director of accessibility. So for people on this call, I have cerebral palsy. I've been in a power wheelchair, and I've been very fortunate to have a phenomenal career. From being born in 1971, when my parents were told, David may not live past 12, David may not speak clearly, if at all. And even if he does, don't expect much because there's not much someone like Dave can do in this world. And they actually recommended to my parents to put me in an institution. And as horrible as that sounds, in 1971, that was the status quo. But luckily for me, my parents didn't want to make that one decision that was going to impact my life. Not that they had the answers or they were visionaries or anything like that, but they knew what grit was and what struggle was. And like I said on our last call, the beauty of growing up with a physical disability is I always like to say it's not my cerebral palsy that holds me back. Rather, it's the environment to be able to accommodate my cerebral palsy in which it holds me back. So growing up in a lifetime full of seeing mismatches of where the environment is falling short really made me suited for agile and change. So I was able to do that very easily. But like all of you, like you two, I grew up I couldn't have been born in any better time of history because technology was starting to come through. Without technology, I wouldn't have had to have a career because living in Windsor, Ontario, it was a very kind of a very factory like trades and tools kind of blue collar world. So even though I was going to school and getting educated, I couldn't work on the line. I couldn't do tool and die. So it's like, what am I going to do with my life? And what do I want to do when I grow up? But luckily with technology, it gave me a career, a platform where I left Windsor to go to university, get a computer science degree, then a business degree. And technology was that enabler that really gave me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that was from a software engineer, which I wasn't a great engineer, to a better product manager because I loved product. It was the right blend of business and technology to leading organizations, to leading agile and change. Up until last year, like you said, I was the vice president of a major financial institution. I was the first person to break the glass ceiling in Canada to be an executive with a disability. And when you turn 50, when you're told that you're not going to live past 12, you do some deep reflection on, what does life mean and what does it matter? And so when I kind of shifted my thinking from what do I want to be when I grew up to how do I want to leave this world better when I'm no longer here, led me to this role of director of accessibility. And I didn't know a lot about accessibility beyond apparently there's more disabilities than just cerebral palsy out there, visible and invisible, that I had to learn. But my wife framed it in a great way because I was getting offers like for drug dealer kind of money and I was kind of torn what I wanted to do. And it was funny though, my wife framed it in a way of if you choose any of these other offers, of course you're going to help those companies make money. You've done it before, you can do that. But if you choose this Microsoft role, you're going to help others like you be able to have a full life like you did. So what do you want to do? And that was a great framing that she did it that way. And it was interesting. My previous employer brought me in to be a change agent to lead change because there was one lady that said, I never hear you talk about disability or accessibility and stuff. I'm like, well, that would be a little too convenient. Because she goes, you talk beautifully about innovation, agile technology, but you never do this. I'm like, no, because I was almost embarrassed, Jeff. Like, growing up, I never got to see others like me in the positions that I had. If there were people with disabilities, they were probably in the call center or not, but nobody grew into the professions I did. So to fit in, I would try to distance myself from the stereotypes. So instead of bringing people with disabilities along with me, sadly, I differentiated myself, and this was my way to right a wrong. So coming to Microsoft, leading the director of accessibility of Surface, I get to work with a really progressive organization that's committed to empower everyone on the planet regardless of ability. And like any other product professional, right, although I'm on Surface, the hardware, I also have to be mindful of working with Windows and Office to ensure we have that good end-to-end experience to empower those people that maybe would have got left behind if we're not mindful in designing with accessibility in mind. Like I always like to say, right? Like we're all going to be disabled someday. Just some of us beat you to it. So build for me today. It's actually building for your future selves because we all have a limited time of ability. You too, Jeff's, everybody. There's an ability cycle, and none of us can predict when you're going to lose that ability. But when that moment happens, I want to make sure I'm responsible to make sure that there is technology out there that will still allow you to live your full life, even though that your ability cycle is coming to an end. It's the quality of life, it's the impact of life. And that's what drove me. I still love Agile, I still love product, but really, what I'm trying to deliver is enablement. And I don't want to limit it to the users that we do focus in on or exclude them either. But I want to make sure we're building for people that need it today and for everyone else that'll need it tomorrow.
As you were talking, it made me think a lot about a conversation that we recently had with Scott Adams, and he was talking about the conversation got into diversity and inclusion, and he was telling the story about facial recognition software and how it wouldn't work for people of color, and it was really eye opening for me because. Like I was telling him at the time, like when I look in the mirror, this is what I see. This is kind of my world. And so if it works for me, then I just kind of assume that it works for everybody else. And what you were just saying was, forgive, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but like we're all on that road to some sort of disability in the end, right?
Yeah,
Like,
we all have an ability cycle, right? Some of
yeah.
us are in the greater part of it, some of us are on the lesser part of it, but we all travel it. We have different starting points, but the end point is the same.
Yeah. And so specifically what he was talking about was like tying this to Scrum doesn't necessarily need to be, but like a good definition of done. And if you can be including or give specificity to different disadvantages or disabilities inside of your definition of done, you're kind of ensuring that you're thinking about those other situations, those other people, those other characteristics in the products that you're designing. And so it was just really resonated with me thinking about, especially with one of the things that I'm doing at work right now is ADA compliance on our website, across our application, really making sure that we're thinking about that. And now that has become, obviously one was an initiative because we had missed the boat with some of this stuff. But even moving forward, that idea of like, hey, we should be adding this to our definition of done. We should be broadening our scope and thinking more diverse here. What are the things that we're missing right now really kind of resonated with me. And I heard a lot of that in what you were just saying.
And Jeff, that's a good start, but it's not complete. And I like to correct something you said:
Sure.
disability and disadvantage. When I was younger, I used to think my disability was a disadvantage, but as I've gotten older and owned it, I see my disability as an advantage because I see the world differently. I've had to solve problems nobody else has had to solve. So now I don't hide from my disability. I embrace it because to me, it's one of my superpowers in my toolkit to do that. But I like how you start with the I like how you said you got that in the definition of done. What we're trying to do at Microsoft is think about designing with people with disabilities and not simply for people with disabilities. And what that means is it's not enough to look at the standards and think about what we need to do and push that down. It's better to work alongside with people with disabilities and figure out what the experience is, what the struggle is, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and work side by side by bringing product makers and people with disabilities side by side to create solutions that don't only benefit people with disabilities. Like, for example, let's look at closed captioning. That was originally made for people that were hearing impaired. Now, if you go to loud bars, they turn on the closed captioning for the sports games because it's a loud environment that limits you hearing something specific. So something that was designed for one demographic, as great product makers, now we get to extend it for a whole new audience and a new value proposition.
Yep.
That's the beauty of designing with people with disabilities and looking at how do we market it? How do we make sure that it can be used for all? Texting used to be made for people with deaf people to talk to each other. Now teenagers primarily only text. Now you can argue they're deaf, but it's not for many natural born ability. So I think if you design with people with disabilities, then we got to go beyond standards, right? I think if we just simply meet standards, people are just dealing with their own guilt that they don't want to be intentionally exclusive. Because I think if you want to start getting that market and get that money, you got to build it inclusively. Like I have cerebral palsy, but my money doesn't. So if you want my money, you better buy products I can use. Because if not, I'll put my disposable income to other areas. And at Microsoft, where we have that philosophy all across the organization, but what to me made Microsoft special for me and my choice is how they chose to do a 5-year initiative where they're investing a lot of money into closing the disability divide outside of Microsoft by getting more disabled people in employment and in education. Because it's funny, guys. Like I got asked in a podcast of Dave, can you give us the difference between when you're on a diverse team and not? And I'm like, just for the very fact that I've been on the team, I made it diverse, automatic. So I said, you're going to have to ask someone else that question because I've only been on diverse teams. But it's those multiple perspectives and that cognitive diversity that builds better products. And like if you mentioned my TED Talk earlier, Sprinting with Cerebral Palsy, in my TED Talk, I talk about my first job and how I created a way better way to do things. It wasn't that I was smarter than my peers, but because it impacted me as a person with a disability first, solving it for me gave the organization greater efficiencies. So it's a benefit to hire people with disabilities because then the product teams get more empathetic. Because if I'm sitting beside you, Jeff, and you're coding, if I go, hey, I'm having trouble using this, what are you going to do? Too bad? You're not going to say that. But when you get to see me, you start to think and look at the way you build software differently. You get to go, how would I do that differently? And that's the beauty of doing it because I keep getting asked, like, how do I find people with disabilities? And it's not like we're that hard to find. Like, you can go to the mall where disabled parking is, sit all day. You're going to find a lot of people with disabilities. But if you bring them closer to you in your user groups, your user research, when you bring them in the design process, whether they work for you or not, if you can employ them, they're more closer to you. But if you find a way to incorporate them in the way you design and build products, now you're going beyond standards and creating great outcomes. And it's not only going to be able to benefit the current people that need it now, but as you age out, Jeff, you're going to have great experiences and you can pat yourself on the back if you'll be able to reach your back.
That's awesome. I want to back up. You said something very, very powerful before, I think, that could be applied to so many different avenues. Doing something with somebody and not for somebody. And so we could back that up and we could say this from a leadership standpoint. Doing something with a leader instead of for something. That's a whole different way. That's what we teach all the time. From an agile standpoint, like, let's not command and control. Let's actually get feedback and use some data and use some empiricism to learn faster. But same thing with like different users and different functionalities, right? Like if we get different people with different perspectives, we can do this with them. Or instead of doing it, or not doing it for them, doing it with them is going to be a huge impact, because you're going to accelerate that feedback loop and that learning, and it opens up so many things. Like, I don't know, the one you were talking through before, a bunch of different features that people have put out there for different purposes, and now they're used by everybody. And the one that I use a lot is the voice to text, or the voice two-finger swipe down on my iPhone, and it reads stuff to me. So when I'm driving, I have like certain books that aren't on Audible, or I want to listen to something, and I can't use my hands. I can't read it. But I want to use that time productively. And so I have books read to me all the time, using that accessibility mode where it reads the text to the page, right? So I think that's an amazing thing, and you don't even know all the possibilities that are out there if you build the stuff, right? Like, there's just so many different ways that we all are certainly disabled at certain periods of time, or even if it's not a later life. It's like just
we all have limited opportunities, environments. Even if you're holding your child, right? You got one arm. You're not going to go drop the kid and two-finger type, right? Like, so, there are moments where we don't always, and that's the beauty of designing with people with disabilities, because you're right. As humans and able-bodied, it's easy for you guys to compensate for that naturally. So you don't get to see the problem. But with people with extreme situations, you can really observe the problem because they can't compensate for it. So that's where the creativity hits. But you jogged my mind on something, Jeff. When we teach leadership courses, what I found funny, and I'm curious to your experience on this too. Before the pandemic, we taught all the good stuff, right? Lead with people, empower, trust. And you get that, yeah, that would be a good progressive way to work. Now that the pandemic hit, it's funny, the leaders that did do that are the ones that are thriving.
Mm-hmm.
The leaders that would say, yeah, that'd be nice to, maybe try sometime, they're the ones struggling.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to what you've noticed on the people you've trained and coached that embraced the PAL leadership during the pandemic versus those that were skeptical.
I mean, just recently I was talking to a leader we had worked with a few years ago, and she's like, if we hadn't done this when we did it, because we I disengaged right before the pandemic, and with that organization, and they're like, if we hadn't done this, we would not be a company right now. We would have not made it through. There's no way. We would have gone under. Like, this saved our organization because we could not have run the organization the way we had been running it, and this changed everything. And now they got rid of actually their site. They're completely remote. They're like this is a new way of working, and this works really well for us, because we've put certain things in place that allow people to really bring their best selves to work, and contribute in many different ways. And so I've seen that some of the good stuff, and then there's probably some out that are really struggling. I guess I haven't heard all of those stories, but if you're right, I think if you have very strict command and control tendencies, or you want to grab and have your hands in everything, that's going to be really hard and taxing, and probably a lot of people leaving those types of organizations right now, because it becomes a whole nother level of unbearable. I would think, like it gets to be like, yeah, it works okay, or it's fine, and like people, I think, are just even more unhappy than they've ever been if in a remote environment where that's where you have that command and control environment.
Well, and I think it's not going to ever return to what it was, but it won't be all fully remote either. I think we're going to learn that doing like discovery and collaboration work is still better in person, but maybe when it comes time to delivery, maybe that's where that's better at home. But now we're appropriating the right activity with the right situation to do it, where it's not all one way or another. And it's going to be cool to see what we learn from this new hybrid way of which things do we still do in person versus which things do we do in the flexible way of working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something you said that is really key that I found so far is that when you don't want to have a hybrid environment, if at all possible, like if you have some people that are in person and then some people that are remote, we're doing the same thing we did before the pandemic where we forget about the people that are remote. Like it's hard to pull them into the conversation. Maybe they don't have their videos on. Maybe everyone else doesn't have their video on. Like maybe they don't have the quite same sound qualities. And it's just, they don't contribute as much because they're not the same level of playing field. It's like, it is almost like they have a little bit of a disability because everyone else can see facial expressions. Maybe they don't have their cameras on and you can't see that. So it's hard to read people, but when you get everybody together.
Well, I think organizations are going to realize they got to run a dual platform, right? So if I book a meeting, it's also a Teams meeting and everybody brings their laptop. Or they get the devices set up where it doesn't suck when you remote call. Like before the pandemic, it's like, can someone dial me in? Can someone unmute? Like, I think we're gotten really good. And I think we got to be more mindful. The etiquette's going to be different too, right? Like when we do virtual meetings, we're encouraged to use chat. If we were chatting when you were talking in a meeting, you'd be like, shut up. I'm trying to,
Yep.
So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of etiquette do we get in this hybrid way.
Yeah, but if you can get everybody together, then you can use different things. Like you can use sticky notes again, and you can move around a room, and you can use, different ways to structure meetings to not do the same old that we've always done, to get more, to get feedback faster, to learn faster, to have better collaboration. But when everyone's remote, we can use the things that we have now, our different tools, our whiteboarding tools, Zoom breakouts, Teams, things like that, breakouts. We can use all these different products to make things better. I think that it's like, I don't know, whenever you can do all or one is like what I've seen work the best, like all remote or all in person. But the hybrids, it's difficult because those, or maybe we just need to learn through that. Those ways of working are standard.
I think it's going to be a new learning curve, and be curious to your thoughts on, do you think people will be more empathetic to creating that right space for hybrid to exist? Because it's got to be more mindful, right? We can take it for granted one way or another, but maybe it ensures that we're being human with always having to constantly manage that hybrid environment, to be mindful of the haves and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as Jeff was talking earlier, I feel like that either all this way or all that way is just a byproduct of the situation that we're in. Like to Dave, what you were just talking about, I do agree that this is just a growing pain. Like this is the intermediate zone where we haven't cracked that nut yet. But I do think that's the way we're going because so many places now are fully embracing a remote culture. Acorns being one of them. Like I will never be moving out to California or New York to work out of those offices. So
well, same with me, right? I report into Seattle. I'm not going to move from Canada to report into Seattle, and I'm even working in a different time zone.
Here in the States,
well, I'm gonna be there like the week of October 24th. Like I'm gonna be there probably 4 or 5 times a year, but that's different than being there every week. So now it's, what's the right frequency?
Yep.
I have no problem with the States. I love my American friends.
Good.
I think that's a valuable way to look at it too. Like if you have the remote and then you say, yep, we're going to do these times a year to build relationships and still have some of that face to face. Like I think that can be really productive. And and can be a really great working environment. But if you were always remote forever, I think that'd be really tough. Or if you were maybe always in person, that might always be really tough because you're losing a lot of flexibility, and you have to live in the same spot, and you can't, get diversity of different regions and different, different perspectives. So
You just nailed the point in the head right there. With remote work, you can get diversity that's not limited to
mhm.
geographic locations. So you don't get people at the high price living areas. You get diversity. And it was funny when you said at the beginning of the call, I'm curious to like, what was it to make a switch during a pandemic? Usually, as somebody with a disability, when I start a place, my wife will be like, "Oh, are you nervous?" And I'm like, "I'm not nervous about the same things most people will, because I know in my job I'll kill it. I'm a workaholic. I won't let that fail. But the things I worry about is, can I get in the bathroom? Will
Mm.
there be somebody to help me with my coat? Is there somebody I can ask to help me get a glass of water?" Now that I'm working, in this hybrid way and remote predominantly, if my bathroom isn't accessible at home, that's on me, right? I can't really complain that, but I don't have to worry about my coat. I don't have to worry about my water. And so I can bring my full self to my workplace without worrying about the environmental things and the mismatches that limit me from being my full self.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, that's so one empowering to hear, but also just like from a business perspective, if if I was the owner, if I was the leader, like that's exactly what I would want. I don't want you wasting your energy, your thought process, any of that on bullshit. Like I want you focused on the task at hand of delivering great products to a customer or writing great lines of code or whatever that job happens to be. Like I want your 110% there, not these other things that are still important, Dave. Like I don't want to diminish them, but like I don't want that having to take your mental energy away from the job that I am hiring you to do. And so I just feel like that's even more reason to embrace a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like Jeff said, I don't mind going quarterly because I love human connection, right? I'm afraid I'll lose all my social norms that I need to keep as a human if I don't see people, right? Where you start going, close today, maybe. Like I don't want to get to that level, but what is the right balance, right? Of being humans, we got to connect, but why does it always got to be who you work with too?
Mm-hmm.
Like we all live around neighbors. We have people that have the same passions. Like I noticed Jeff had a Green Bay Packers cup. I'm a Detroit Lions fan, so have fun
Oh, I'm
making fun
sorry.
of me. But yeah, and everybody thought my cerebral palsy was my biggest challenge. It's not. It's the Detroit Lions. They got to win one.
Yeah, you made me think of something, Dave. Like some people are really passionate about things because they've had something painful in their life, something they've struggled with, something that was a big challenge for them, and then that led to this passion. And you must really like working through that stuff because you're a Detroit Lions fan, like it's
Exactly. I know resilience. I know never give up. I have a false sense of optimism, all that stuff. But you're right. I am passionate on it because as you get older, I know I have a responsibility to make it better for other people with disabilities behind me, to change the perceptions. Like, I'm kind of interested, not to put you on the spot. The first time you met me in my wheelchair, what was your thoughts?
I was like, wow. It was at a face to face. I had just become a PST. It was like signed the contract and was there at the face to face 5 days later. So it was like this is a brand new community, meeting all these amazing people. And I remember talking to a handful
You're
of
like,
people.
look, they got one of those.
well, I was like, well, cool, interesting. I wonder how you teach classes. I wonder how this is different for you because I was like,
Yeah.
it's got to be way different than what I do. I stand up in front of a room. I've got a clicker. Like I'm drawing stuff all the time. Like, wow, I wonder how Dave does that. And so I was just really interested in what you were doing and how you did stuff. And I don't know. I think I was very curious the first time I saw you. And I don't know if you remember this, but we definitely had some conversations over those 2 days. And then you're one of those people like, I need to get to know you because you did stand out in a crowd, you know?
Pun intended.
Yeah.
But no, and it's funny when I teach because I used to worry, can I command a room if I can't stand? And I've learned how to have a presence when you can't physically create that presence. And that's why I like to be very impactful with my words. And I think one of my superpowers is I can connect with people, I can look at you, and I can have your attention.
Mhm. Yeah, you definitely draw a deep connection to a lot of people and you're very, very insightful. Like that was my first perception, I think, of you when we had some conversations. And I had a little bit of, I'll tell you the truth, a little bit of imposter syndrome the first time I met you and a few other of the PSTs, and being into that community was like, wow, like, do I really belong here? You know, like there's so many great
Well, it's
people.
hard, right? It's a tough community because we're all at the top of our game, and unfortunately, we're so unkind to each other. Oh, they made a mistake, and we're ready to just pounce on it, and that makes us better, but it also gets intimidating. So it's
Mhm.
kind of interesting hearing your perspective as a new person walking into the lion's den. And notice I said lions.
Yeah.
So, hey, Dave, I want to steer a little bit left here. What you said that you were kind of going on a journey with yourself. You dropped 50 pounds. Like, why? Like, what made you think about that decision? Why? What's different about you today versus a year ago?
I don't know. I think you get tired of feeling tired and crappy. And was it the cerebral palsy? Was it that I'm out of shape? And then there's vanity too, right? I want to look good too. Like this good looking person in front of you just doesn't happen overnight. And I wanted to make sure I had a higher quality of life as I went on. So I did exercise. Because a lot of us, we could have got the bread maker out like most people did when COVID started and went, we might die, but boy, we're going to have baked goods till that time comes. Instead, I wanted to make sure as we came out of this, how can I live my best life? And if you don't mind me plugging, I'm also preparing for a 5K walk, which is 3 miles in the States, to raise money for cancer. Now, you might say to yourself, Dave, wouldn't it be more obvious if you did a fundraiser for cerebral palsy? But I think as people, as humans, we have to step aside our own problems and challenges and focus on others. So my hope is to trying to raise money for cancer through the Terry Fox Walk. Um, Somebody else will eventually do something for cerebral palsy. And I think if we all talk about diversity and inclusion, hope should be inclusive for all, and our purpose needs to be diverse beyond ourselves. So, in doing that, because do many Americans know who Terry Fox is?
I don't know. I don't think so. Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah, very short, and like he was like a very athletic young Canadian kid that at university found out he had cancer and he had to get his leg amputated. And when he got to see all the children suffering with cancer, he wanted to raise awareness. So he trained for over a couple years to get himself in shape with the hope of doing a marathon, running across Canada in 1980 with a prosthetic leg to raise money for cancer. And at that time, I was a kid getting numerous surgeries like most kids with cerebral palsy. So I had to spend a ridiculous amount of times in the hospital. But when I got to watch his marathon of hope, I said to myself, one day, if I can get out of this hospital, I want to be able to one day do something like he did to inspire hope in others. Now he never got to complete it because his cancer overwhelmed him and he stopped 2/3 of the way through. But in Canada, every year, his foundation has kept going to raise awareness. And it's very painful for me to walk 5K. It's going to be like a marathon for you.
Mm-hmm.
But My hope is if I can take away someone's suffering or help in a little bit of way or inspire someone else to do something like that, it goes beyond the money I raised. It can go beyond someone else to carry the torch when someday I might not be able to.
That's awesome. We'll get a link from you, Dave, if you have one for
Yeah,
how people can donate.
sure
We'll put it in the
do.
show notes.
I would love that. All the money goes to cancer. I set a goal to raise 300,000, so
How are you doing on it?
it might. I'm 10% there.
Okay.
And people always tell me that I set impossible goals, but you know what? It's an impossible world. So if we don't set impossible goals, we're just not going to make it.
You are an
And I've been.
inspiring dude. You know that, Dave?
I just try. And that's all I can do is try to be better every day. And that's what Agile is about, right? It's no matter where you are, how can I be better?
And I love that everything you do is about making a difference in the world. You're always trying to make the world a better place for other people. That's very selfless.
I wasn't always like that. As I was younger, I was like a dick like everyone else. Me. And I think you get to a certain point in your life that you feel fortunate and you want to make sure that it was beyond what you could achieve in your time on this earth. How did you empower others to achieve alongside of you? And at the end of the day, I hope that's how I'm measured, and hopefully I made enough difference to people.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.